Hey, Shalom. My name is Paul. I'm the Director of Comfort My People, and we're here to continue our journey from Jacob. We're at the point in our journey where the sons of Jacob are the players in the scene. Jacob will obviously be a part of it while he's still alive. He's the father of the 12 descendants, the 12 sons of Jacob. And he's got several daughters. We don't know all of them. We talked about one, Dinah. But this time we're going to highlight one particular son, which is Joseph, and I think you're going to see some things about his life that are very, very pertinent to the story of the gospel in the New Testament as well as throughout the Old Testament. He's a very special young man, but he goes through some very serious troubles and has to deal with his own things. We don't see all of it, but he has to deal with it in order for him to receive what's necessary from God. And I believe you're going to find similarities to Jesus, no doubt. We're going to talk about that. But also some things about Joseph and just as a believer, what it means to be a believer. And I hope that these things are going to apply to you in ways that you would find it very valuable. So let's get on with it. The blessing we've talked about quite a bit, and we will continue. It's highlighted throughout the story of the gospel. So the blessing is God's remedy for society's dilemma, and not just our own society, but all the societies in the world. There's trouble. There's trouble everywhere. And so we've proven as a people that our inability to live at peace has reached a climax. We can't do it. So the blessing is the gospel, and it's a gospel of peace. But how it is passed down is at the heart of the gospel and the goal of our instruction. It should be the concern of all believers. So in this portion of our journey, the personalities and the interactions of the 12 sons of Jacob are beginning to surface, and they're not exemplary. It was not unusual in that region at the time to have more than one wife, which Jacob did. So Jacob didn't plan on being a bigamist. He loved Rachel. But his father-in-law, to-be, was a conniver, as was Jacob. And he connived Jacob into becoming a bigamist if he wanted his daughter Rachel. So it's a long story, and needless to say, his household was dysfunctional. Now, there's one brother who's the son of Jacob. There's 12 sons. There's one who stands out, though he unites the other brothers ultimately, but he unites them right now in this point of the story with a mutual jealousy. So his name was Joseph, and his life was in jeopardy from childhood. So a huge problem surfaced in the family because of his poor understanding, Jacob's poor understanding, of what good parenting should look like. And it says in Genesis 37, verse 3, Now Israel, whose Jacob's name, remember, was changed by God, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And also, he made him a special coat of many colors. And so, right away we know that this is trouble ahead. It's a terrible decision to love one child over the other. It's inexcusable. And I've seen it played out in people that I know, and it didn't turn out well. It's really sad. I know there's opportunities where you have this sense of, strife in the family, and one child seems to stand up in a favorable way, but you can never, ever love one more than the other. It's just, there's something wrong there, and it has to be addressed immediately. So, but we need to give Jacob some slack. Because when he was alive, he had no good models. He had no good role models. His father was not a good role model. Even his grandfather Abraham wasn't. And so I'm not saying always, but in some areas. So when it comes to good parenting, there was failure from the beginning. And yet, you gotta get it for Jacob. Just think about how long ago it was, and how primitive things were as far as society goes. And there was no believing community at all. So he never attended Focus on the Family Conference, how to raise children, successfully. And the Ten Commandments weren't even written yet. So these guys, and I'm talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the descendants, they didn't have a whole lot to lean on, when it comes to examples. But they were pioneers of our faith. And there was a lot of baggage, though, that they had to overcome in order to reflect that nature. So nevertheless, all of this said, there's poor choices that we all make. And they always lead to poor consequences. We can't choose our choices. We can do things we want to do, but we cannot choose the consequences. And this is what we're going to see in Jacob's life. And it's going to take a long time before redemption comes to the house of Jacob. So here's the reaction that after Jacob made it public that he loved, it was obvious though, he loved Joseph more than the others. So it says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. Now that's just the beginning of sorrows. And God cannot tolerate that. It's his story, remember. And these players, he knew how they're going to respond. And without brotherly love, this story just cannot be written. So brotherly love, it's the theme of God's heart. And it must find its way into the sons of Jacob. The blessing is God's antidote for all mankind because it is designed to be delivered to all the families of the earth. And we should be working as disciples of Jesus. We should be working for that outcome. It is the Great Commission. The lack of brotherly love will leave devastating effects on this family until God shows up. And ironically, it begins with Joseph. So at this point, Jacob is 17 years old, and Joseph was told by Jacob, his father, to go check on his brothers. Now, there's still one younger brother than Joseph, who's Benjamin, who will not be in this story. So Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers. They're out attending their flocks in a nearby valley, and he goes willingly. And so when they see him approaching the brothers, their jealousy of Joseph, their brother Joseph, began to simmer, and it was just aroused. And immediately they came up with a plan. And this is how the enemy works when our minds are racked by wrong thinking. We'll always come up with a plan because the enemy wants to give us a plan. And so this is what happened in verse 18. So when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Can you imagine the tension in the air? Now this is the story. God doesn't hide these things. So before we go forward, though, we need to go back. So this is verse 18. We're going to go back to verse 15. And in this scenario, it's a very short scenario. It seems like, why is it even in there? But after Joseph left his home to seek his brothers, it's a seemingly insignificant event that took place on his way. But I believe that so much that it requires our full attention. It's so brief, it's overlooked. I don't think I've ever heard it taught or preached. So Joseph had an encounter that is pertinent to this story. But not just this story, to the entire biblical narrative, because the theme of what happens in this short interlude between two people is very important for us as followers of Jesus. So it says this: Now a certain man found him, and there he was, this is Joseph, there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So it doesn't say this man owned the property. It doesn't say where he was coming from, where he was going to, but he was a certain man. He reminds me of Melchizedek, who had no background to him. He had no descendancy. It just shows up in the story. So this certain man asks him this question: What are you seeking? And Joseph answered, I am seeking my brothers. Now this is where this begins to take a shift. It's a critical pivot in this narrative. And Joseph is going to transform in the process into a type of Jesus. Now, typology is a way of translating the Bible using symbolism. It could be in many different forms. It could be people, places, objects. But Joseph is a type of Jesus. in search of his brothers. And he's all in. He said, I am seeking my brothers. He knows that could be a problem. But he continues his search for his brothers. And you know what? This certain man is not just any old man. He's a certain man. And I consider him to be a type, but a type of God, God the Father. Because Jesus came to seek and to save his own. And he came as the Savior, but he was also a brother to his fellow Jews, especially his disciples. He speaks about his brothers right to the very end of his life on earth. So Joseph, before he does this salvation, in a sense that we're going to see, this redemption of his family, but specifically his brothers, he meets this man, a certain man. And so he's a type. So he's a type of God the Father. And it's God's way of teaching things in a very artistic way, without telling us, oh, here you go, there's a guy, here's the type of Jesus, and blah blah blah. He just shows us the guy, but what he says is so critical. Very little part to play. Probably wouldn't got paid if he was in Hollywood very much. And so this is how God wants to connect, not just Jesus as to Joseph as a type, but he wants to connect the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, its people, its places, its location, its objects of worship, the temple and tabernacle. He wants to connect that to the New Testament, which is going to be the new covenant that he makes according to the prophets that they would bring. And so that's what we sing. So here we see this reflection of Jesus in Joseph, and this amazing aspect of how God is telling his story should elevate our desire to learn more. It's really incredible. The connection to Jesus is unmistakable as we go on, and it's unique in literature. Like other pieces of literature do not have this aspect, most of them, and if they do, it has some kind of biblical source to it, foundation to it. So here Joseph was sent by his father to check on the welfare of his brothers, but they were not where they were supposed to be. They were in a different field. And so they wandered into this field, and spiritually, this is very similar to what Jesus did on earth, to check out his brothers. And he did, but he found them wandering off into fields where they didn't belong. Fields of unbelief, fields of misunderstanding, fields of having a wrong value system. And we see the same thing happen with Jesus' 12 disciples, that they didn't get along very well. And nevertheless, he stuck with them right to the very end. And he lost one, which was Judas. So as a result, though, in Jesus' day, he came seeking his brothers, but they missed his day of visitation. He came to his own, who were the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but his own received him not. And so instead of turning around for Joseph now and going home, I mean, he could sense this thing that's going on with his brothers. He listens to this certain man, and he continues his mission to pursue their welfare. That's what he was out to do. So just as Jesus did, Jesus said this, that he only does what the Father tells him. And this is the same thing what Joseph did. His father, Jacob, told him to go find your brothers and seek their welfare. And he did it. And he was validated when this certain man came along, who was obviously one infinite steps higher than Jacob, but still he was a type of God the Father. And so Joseph was about to become the greatest type of Jesus in the Bible. He came to his own, but his own received him not. But also, and this is what's going to happen, they won't. But then he was also betrayed. Now it's the same as Jesus. He was already despised. His brothers hated him. But soon he'll be rejected. And we're going to read about that next time. And Joseph will become a man intimately acquainted with grief. So it's interesting, though, that this certain man asked Joseph, "What are you seeking?" Because the same question is asked in the New Testament by Jesus. And this should really get our attention. It should make us wonder, is there some kind of lesson that we need to unfold, to discover? I think that should be our perspective whenever we pick up the Bible, that there's something in there that we need to know. There's something that needs to pertain to our lives, something that we can grasp on to enhance our understanding and our will to serve. Because that's what the Bible is. It's a living document, and it's sharp, and we can't be afraid of being cut by it, because it's going to cut away things that don't belong. So for the remainder of this episode, we're going to leave Joseph now, and we're going to fast forward to the book of John and see where Jesus asked this question. And I think there's really important lessons here that about seeking God, the whole concept of it. And I think it's going to tie these stories together in a way that only God can do. So pay attention, if you will, and be ready to consider these things. So I think that it's going to be very individually important. So remember, he asked him a certain question. What are you seeking? The same question we're going to go into is found in John chapter 1. So the context of it is that John the Baptist was preparing the way of the Lord. That was prophetic. It comes from Isaiah 40, verse 3, I believe it starts out, that he was a voice crying in the wilderness. This is John. And his father noticed it. His father recognized the presence of his son and where his heart was and what he was doing, that he was going to prepare the way of the Lord. And then John the Baptist said the same thing, that he was there, not as the Messiah, but to prepare the way for the Messiah. So John the Baptist, by the way, he was not a Baptist, he was a Jew, and he recently baptized Jesus. And so Andrew and another disciple of John, Andrew was a disciple of John at the time, John the Baptist, as was another guy, we don't know who he is, and they were at the Jordan. They got baptized on themselves. They saw Jesus being baptized, and they witnessed this descendance of what looked like a dove on Jesus, and heard the voice from heaven say, "This is my beloved son." And so obviously they'd be startled by this whole thing. It was electricity in the air. And so they decided that they would follow Jesus on his way home. So when Jesus on his way home, and when he noticed them, he turned and asked them this question: "What are you seeking?" So they answered with a question, which is something that Jesus does often. And they said to him, "Rabbi." Now that's important, and we're going to talk about that later on, not on this episode. So remind me if I forget. So they said to him, "Rabbi," which is translated, this is how it reads in the Bible, which is translated teacher. So that's how they see him, as a teacher. And they ask him, "Where are you staying?" So the question they asked was, Jesus asked them, "What are you seeking?" And what were they seeking? Well, we don't really know, but it had something to do with the place he was staying. So they followed him, and that's what they said. So when they saw where he was staying, it says in the Bible, they stayed for the day. So in fact, Andrew, he would become Jesus' first disciple. And soon his brother Peter would join him. But the other guy that came with Andrew, we don't know anything of. There's no speaking. He doesn't get a name. There's no activity of him after this. But, I wonder what happened to this guy. But perhaps the rabbi, quote unquote, he was looking for did not meet his expectations. Now, looking for a rabbi is something that these young Jewish men did. It wasn't unusual. But how close you stayed with your rabbi, that was always your own choice. But the rabbis demanded, allegiance to them. So it was a big choice. Who are you going to follow? So maybe the other guy said, "I'm not following this guy." And why? We don't really know. But perhaps the rabbi he was looking for did not meet his expectations when he saw where Jesus was staying. So we see this repeatedly in the Gospel of John. Many follow Jesus, many followers of Jesus, but they don't stay followers of Jesus. And at one point, Jesus pointed this out, and he told a crowd, after he had fed them with the fishes and the loaves, he said that they were seeking him for the fish and the loaves. So apparently Jesus was looking for authentic followers because in that time the crowd thinned out dramatically. And maybe that is why he rephrased his question, as we'll see next, from what are you seeking to whom are you seeking? Now we're going to see this question asked 2 more times. So this is also in the book of John. But Jesus does ask this question three times, whom are you seeking? And it's on the last day of his life. So that's an indication that we need to pay attention. He asks this question in 3 scenarios. One is tied together the first time, but it's on his last day of his life. So we're going to shift gears to the night of Jesus' betrayal. It's the Passover, which was the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper. And Judas, one of the 12, had left earlier in the Passover meal to make a deal with the Sanhedrin, because he saw something in Jesus it was off the rockers to him. He's going off the rails. So, but the other disciples, after the dinner, accompanied Jesus on his way to the Garden of Gethsemane. And that's where he prayed so intensely that it appeared to be drops of blood dripping from his eyes. But at that moment in the garden, he hears these footsteps, and his attention was shifted to, I believe, is the most dramatic moment of his life. And there's Judas. And this is what it says. He's accompanied. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. And then Judas, having received a detachment of troops, a detachment is a large number. Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers, leading officers, from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" Can you picture the intensity of this? His disciples were obviously tired. It's not an easy walk in the night from Jerusalem to where they were in this upper room, to cross the Kidron Valley and then go up to the Mount of Olives. So they were reasonably tired, and they couldn't keep their eyes open. And Jesus wanted them to just stay up just for 1 hour and pray with me. But they couldn't. So he was on his own. And then Judas, who was one of his own. Judas was close to him. He sat next to him, most likely, in the Seder meal, the Last Supper. And he told him, when he got up from the table, he says, "Go do what you intend to do." And somehow Judas must have known what he was going to do, but I don't think he knew the depth of it. I think he knew what he wanted to do, but he never, ever considered the consequence of it. And Jesus knew that, and he was merciful to him. So they said, Jesus asked the question, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he answered, "I am he. I am he." I am alone is a recognition that he is God, but I am he. Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach. Yeshua means salvation. HaMashiach means the anointed one. His name they called him Jesus Christ. That's in Hebrew, Yeshua HaMashiach. The salvation, I am salvation, the anointed one who brings salvation. That's literally what it means. When he said, "I am," he was identifying himself, just like Moses in the desert, in the wilderness, when he said to God, when he introduced himself to Moses, and he told him what he wanted him to do, he said, who am I going to say sent me? And he said, "Say, I am sent me. I am." And Jesus uses that phrase 7 times in his life and ministry. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world, etc. But he said it 7 times. So I am is very significant. I am he. And what happened to them? And they drew back and they fell to the ground. This is a detachment, the they that he's talking about. So there's something very wrong in this scene, though. It's very wrong. They knew, if they knew whom they were seeking, they would not have done it this way. So I want you to notice the symbolism in this description. So they came with lanterns and torches. They brought their own light. The Passover always falls on the night of the full moon. It's a full moon. The full moon lights up. They didn't have lights like city lights like we have. It lit up the forest that they were in, or the garden area where they were in. The moon could certainly penetrate that garden. But they came with their own light. They came with lanterns and torches. Jesus, the light of the world, was spotlighted by God's creation that night in the natural. The presence of the Lord in him lit up the atmosphere. I am certain of that. I'll give you an illustration. Some years ago, I was an extended chaplain in a maximum security cell. Maximum security prison, also it was a death row prison in Huntsville, Texas. And there was this expression, so if there was a couple other chaplains, the main chaplain, the head chaplain of the prison, and then another one who was pretty much a full-time volunteer, and myself. And so me and the volunteer had ways of trying to carry on ministry. He would work different times as me, and he came up to me. I remember one time, the first time he said this, he said, I want you to follow up on this particular guy who I never met before. And he said, he's in cell block so-and-so, and just walk down there, you'll know right away because the lights are on. And with the lights were on, I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but it was a spiritual term. And so as I walk down the cell block, I'm really kind of like concerned. These are tough guys. And, they're all saying something to me as I'm walking by. All of a sudden I come to a cell and the lights are on. It's this one brother who was a believer, strong believer, and he was filled with the Holy Spirit, and the presence of God was so real, it lit up the darkness of that whole prison. And that's what I saw in others after that, and I recognized it very quickly. But they came with their own manufactured light to find Jesus. Now, I'm going to risk stepping on toes, but do we really need a light show in our worship services? Is that in any way making us feel like Jesus is in the room with us? I mean, I think we're doing things that are similar, and this is what I think this story kind of brings some warnings to really consider ourselves as individuals and ourselves as believers in community of believers. So they brought weapons also. Why did they bring weapons? Did Jesus ever hurt anybody in his life? He's 33 years old. So they brought weapons to force him to become their possession. It's like a search and capture, search and seize mission against the king of the universe. They have any idea who they're seeking? Is that why we seek Jesus? They wanted to capture him. I know it was for the wrong reasons, but it's important to consider, why are we seeking Jesus? Or people that you know. They need to be considering this. Why are you seeking Jesus? Because it's just important to consider that why we are seeking or how we portray him is so important for the way others would seek him. We set an example. So look what happened. They all fell back to the ground. That should have been enough to cause these seekers to repent. But it wasn't, especially for Judas. He had followed Jesus for 3 years. He fell away because he was looking for a Jesus who came with fame and fortune. Jesus was not whom Judas expected. His journey had an abrupt shift, and his consequence was tragic. But sadly, this is the response of many people I've witnessed who have claimed to be Christians over the years. It's maybe not as tragic a result, but it's always disappointing. Jesus warned his disciples of this consequence before, and as he walked with them and taught with them. And this parable of the seed and the sower is a great example. When the expectations, and he speaks about this seed, this falling away when the troubles of this world came, the tribulations of this world came, not the tribulation, but just the average troubles that we face daily. If we follow Jesus, there's this expectation that we have that comes with it. But when expectations are man-made, the journey loses its glamour, and disappointment leads to dismissal or even worse, of falling to the ground, which is as low as it goes, the ground level. The writer of the book of Hebrews, he also warned of this kind of approach at the end of chapter 10. But he came with a word of encouragement. He was talking about those who have fallen away. But he says, but we, meaning his readers, we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Those are the kind of seekers that God is looking for. And this is what we need to be. We need to examine ourselves. And I know I'm talking to a major group of people who do want to continue the seeking of God, because we do continue. It's not a one-time deal. It's a lifestyle. When we seek the person and not the benefits, we're honest before God. But ironically, in the process of our seeking, he finds us, and he begins to change us into his likeness. I know it's not always easy. In fact, most often it's not easy. But nothing of value is. When we seek him, we will find him if we seek him with a pure heart. So next time we're going to explore the following 2 times that Jesus asked the same question. But in the meantime, if you think this is of any benefit to you or could be of benefit to others, please share it for that purpose. And let us know. It would be great to know how this affects you. Not just this one, but the other episodes we've done, because we want to spend our time with what is of value to others. We want to be a blessing. And if we're not a blessing, then we're on the wrong trail. So shalom, until next time.